welcome to another episode from the DJ Anesh series, bringing you the best in Southeast Asian history, your one and only source of Southeast Asian history in RVHS, and clearly the best by far. There is simply no competition. Guys, are you all sad that the podcast series is about to end soon? We are literally counting down our podcast till the end and the last one that we have because the syllabus is finishing soon. Cry, boo-hoo, lament, the loss, the memories, the good times. Welcome back to another podcast, guys. I'm glad to hear and to see you guys again. As it is right now, as I'm recording this podcast, it is 10:53 p.m. on a Thursday. It is 18th of June. We are 1 hour and 7 minutes away from phase 2 and going into phase 2 with the reopening of all the cafes and restaurants and all that stuff. I know what's on your mind, guys. I know what's on your mind. I know that you guys tomorrow, man, the bubble tea shops are just gonna be filled with people. I mean, it speaks a lot about Singapore culture, right? When ministers, they come out in their Facebook press releases, bubble tea is specifically mentioned. Man, what's up with that? I was telling my wife just now, no man, please do not stand in the queue for 2 hours on end just to get that milk and sugar and tea and blah 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 and all that kind of stuff. No, please, come on. Pace yourself, guys. The bubble tea shop, right, will be there for you next week. It will be there for you next month. It will be there for you next year. It's like it will always be there for you. It will always be there. So it's that one reliable partner or friend that you have in your life. No matter the distance, right? It will always be there for you. So just pace yourself, guys. But in all seriousness though, please take care of yourselves as we enter into this new phase, as we recover from that. And just take the precautions and all that kind of stuff. Now today, guys, for the lecture, it's going to be a bit different today. I am not going to be lecturing that much because I have only the immediate factors to cover for the causes of the AFC, and then we are kind of done actually for the causes of the AFC. So I'm not going to be lecturing that much. I only have really this one category of factors to cover. And then after this, what I want you guys to do with the remainder of your time is to go and read 2 documents that are in the Google Drive right now. So later on, I'll identify which are the things that you need to read, and hopefully it will help you in conceptualizing your arguments for this topic. So without further ado, let's go into this topic so that you guys have more time during this slot to do some reading if you could. So yeah, for today, we are going to go into the other category of factors. I term it as the immediate factors that are leading towards the AFC. So in the previous few classes, we talked about the structural factors, and again, with structural, I gave you all some conditions and some associations that are related to structural. And you might want to recap that a bit before you go into this lecture slides. So for immediate factors, I would say that there would also be some associations whenever you use the word immediate. So they are fairly recent to the event. That's why you use the term immediate, happening like 3 to 1 year before the event itself. So fairly recent, the exact number of years, that's really up to you to conceptualize, but that is that connotation over there. The immediate factors in this case study of the AFC, it also has another connotation in that it seems to be event based, or it's rather ad hoc. So things that are that phenomenon or behavior that you're starting to see closer to the crisis. So this serves as a direct contrast to the association that we had with structural factors, because with structural factors we looked at how they were extensive and that they were growing across time leading up to the crisis itself. So we can see that the associations that are connected to the word immediate are quite direct contrast of what we see in the term structural. So with that in mind and with those associations of immediate in mind, we are going to look at the factors that we can classify under this category of factors that leads to the AFC. Speaking of AFC, Junhao was the one that pointed this out to me. I always make the joke, like AFC, KFC, AFC, KFC, you know, that kind of nonsense that I usually do. But he pointed out, AFC, A actually stands for Anesh. Oh my god, I don't know why, but like just didn't make that connection. So the AFC, Anesh, Kentucky chicken, best chicken on earth. Cool. Enough talk sing song. Let's go on to the content. Now, with the immediate causes to the AFC, again, trying to look at this term immediate, right? Again, the number of years that you want to conceptualize in immediate is kind of up to you. For me, I'm going to give you the full range of options. So I'm actually going to start out this immediate factors, right? From as early as the end of the Cold War. So sometime around 1991, I'm actually going to start my concept of immediate factors from there. If you feel uncomfortable with this, like you feel that 6 years is too much of a historical distance between the end of the Cold War and the crisis itself, that's fine. That's up to you, actually. So for you, if you feel more comfortable conceptualizing immediate factors as things relating to what's happening in 1995, 1996, and 1997 itself, that's fine as well. I'm just giving you the full range of options of factors you can consider. How you want to categorize them, how you want to use them, it will be entirely up to you. So let's go through each of the points here that do play a part in contributing to the AFC. Remember, we are looking at causal factors. In this immediate factors category, we are looking at causal factors that are appearing closer to the event date itself. The first one, I think I've mentioned before, that as we enter into the 1990s, that period, one of the major global shifts and one of the major changes in the global landscape is the end of the Cold War. And I don't know like what the full range of arguments that are out there, but for me it's quite clear that in terms of who wins the Cold War, definitely it is the West. The USSR collapses, and there are many other indicators to show that the West has quote unquote won the Cold War. So man, that's your ASMR for you. Okay, cool. Too much coffee. Now, it's quite clearly right that it's quite clear to see that the West wins the Cold War. And when I say the West, you notice that I didn't use the word the USA, which you can associate but I don't really want to do that. When I say the West has won, I think what has clearly won beyond a shadow of a doubt, right, is the economic philosophy, the economic system of capitalism. Like democracy versus authoritarianism or democracy versus communism, that kind of stuff, like I feel is a bit more debatable. But in terms of economic systems, between capitalism versus the command economy, between liberalization against isolationism or closed off economies or whatever it is, I think it's very clear that capitalism wins the day. So again, since this is an economic topic, I'm going to be focusing on that. When we talk about the 1990s, the period starting from 1991, maybe even before that, we are looking at the world entering into a period of economic liberalization. The most important factor of this that connects to the AFC is that economies are opening themselves up to one another in order to forge interdependent relationships, especially interdependent economic relationships. Now, to forge a relationship such as this between nations and even in a multilateral setting, it's clear to see that economies have to be open to one another. The movement of goods and services, the movement of peoples, the movement of money and capital and investments, all these things are crossing national lines, and it is for the common prosperity and the common benefit of all, as so the theory goes, and as so the evidence goes as well. As I want to keep emphasizing that this is a period where most nations on that side of the economic spectrum is doing well. Southeast Asia is doing well. You know, the 5 economies that we are looking at, they are doing well. A lot of it has come down to economic liberalization, where it links to the expansion of their markets. It leads to the expansion of their imports and exports and things like that. So generally things that are helping the economy. But again, the key thing that I want you guys to understand here is that while dominantly it seems that it would benefit economies, there is that exposure, there is that vulnerability that economies will be subsumed under when they open up their economy. So they're opening themselves up to the conditions that are external to the country. So whatever happens to their trading partners, or whatever happens to the world, whatever happens to the economic cycles and the fluctuations and all these kind of things, it will impact them. So that level of exposure is increasing by the year. Now this level of exposure, this era of liberalization, this opening up of economies, does it directly cause the AFC? I think by itself, perhaps not. As I said, this was something that governments and nations felt that it was a good thing. They could see that it could lead to growth, expansion, prosperity. So by itself, I think it would connote a more positive association. But I want you all to understand that it comes along with that higher degree of exposure, that higher degree of vulnerability to external conditions and external actors. So it does increase that sense of vulnerability for Southeast Asian economies as they continue to liberalize more and more. One of the key institutions that plays a part in this is the IMF, and the IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund. Now, the IMF is one of the chief economic vehicles. It is one of the chief economic advisors for the global economic community. And what they say holds a measure of weight because there is a huge amount of credibility and there is a huge amount of resources that are attached to them. So because of that kind of power that they have, usually their advice or their prescription, their policies are going to be taken into account. At this point in time, I think it's quite clear to see that the IMF would be running the economic liberalization era, the economic liberalization approach as well. So you have this end of the Cold War, which is a global circumstance, and to reinforce the movement towards liberalization and the momentum for it, you have a chief vehicle in the IMF over here that is also advocating for opening up of economies and interdependence and trade and all that kind of stuff. So the IMF is relevant to Southeast Asia because quite a few of the countries that were crisis hit later on had very close connections to the IMF. In fact, some of them were under some sort of scheme from the IMF, and there was a lot of guidance and tutelage from the IMF. I'm thinking, of course, of the Philippines, but there are some other case studies out there as well. Whatever it is, the impact factor is the same, which is it leads to greater opening up of economies. The second reason why I want to bring up the IMF in the pre-crisis period is not just about that greater exposure of economies, but the IMF, together with some other economic institutions in the world, they would give ratings to how sound an economy is, or how sound a financial or how sound a particular sector is. The problem is that once again, as I said, a lot of the core issues they are underlying, and at this point in time, they may not have boiled to the surface yet. A lot of the reports that were coming out from institutions like the IMF was actually that they gave a clean bill of health to Southeast Asian economies and the way that they were running. They gave a clean bill of health, especially to the financial sector, which, when you get that kind of good rating, it reinforces the belief that everything is going okay, the current practices can continue, where in fact all these current practices are really damaging the structures of the finance sector and the economy as a whole. It's kind of like rating lah, right? It's kind of like when you buy like Grab food or whatever, and then you give a rating. Yeah, and you give a 5 star to this guy, even though he treats you like shit, but because you can't be bothered or you don't have the heart to give him a 2 star. So like this guy goes around with like a 5 star rating, and everyone thinks that he's the best like Grab food deliverer on earth, but actually his attitude is quite shit. That kind of stuff. So the great analogy there, Shane. But yeah, the international monetary rating is kind of similar. The impact factor over here is that it gives a sense of assurance that everything is going well in Southeast Asia, and particularly on the Southeast Asian governments, it kind of sends that message to them as well, which is why there is no incentive to really enact genuine reform to the financial sector or any other sector that's in trouble. And basically they continue on lah, their bad practices. The banks themselves or the finance institutions themselves, they themselves are also receiving the message, and they're like, okay, cool, let's continue to do like whatever we are doing. So the excessive borrowing that is happening, the bad debt, the bad investments, everything that is contributing towards the crisis, when we cover in the structural factors, right, it will just continue to go on because they have that sense of assurance, this time not just from the government, but even from an international monetary organization. So, that is that kind of things that continue to perpetuate this snowball that continues to build up. And again, it is just waiting to erupt lah, in that sense. So those are the first 2 points over there. ASEAN as well, you can when we did SPQ with ASEAN, that from 1989 with APEC, and then later in 1992 with AFTA, there is a huge liberalization agenda as well over there. AFTA in itself advocates for free trade, and once again that this kind of thing would open up economies to one another. It really makes economies interdependent on one another, and therefore there is that sense of vulnerability alongside the opportunities. In good times it will be good, but in bad times everyone will suffer, as what was happening in 97 itself lah. So even from a regional standpoint, the direction and the advocacy from the regional organization ASEAN or its platform AFTA, all these things were calling for the same thing as what the global community was calling for, and that was liberalization. Good stuff coming out of that, definitely, but also that sense of increased exposure and vulnerability. So I'm looking at the big actors in the first 3 points over here, from the global to the regional and all that. The next 3 points are more ad hoc events that happen in the lead up to 1997. So these are events that are happening to specific countries, but it would also affect Southeast Asia as a whole. Now, the first one that I want to talk about is Japan. And I don't know if you guys really cover this in detail with IH and Team 2 in IH when you talk about the global economy and all that. But Japan and Southeast Asia, they have a very close connection. I think you do know that Japan, they have a huge industrial expansion, and they have huge growth leading on from the late 60s onwards, and it's going really good for Japan, so well that Japan can actually have a regional outlook where their economy is doing really well, and now they are looking to expand their economy and to look into investments in the region. And of course, their eyes gaze into Southeast Asia. So they start to form a lot of investment links, and they start to form a lot of trade relationships. They even start to form a lot of assistance programs to Southeast Asia. So that is really connected. It's really that sense of interdependency. Of course, Japan being the bigger partner in this, at that point in time. Now, with this interdependency, again, that comes that vulnerability. And here comes the vulnerability because sometime around the late 80s and all that, there were some worrying signs emerging out of Japan. And in 1991, Japan experienced a recession. So one of the key contributors to Southeast Asia in terms of economic investment, trade, and so on and so forth, starts to experience a recession, which means to say that they don't have that kind of capacity to invest, or they don't have that kind of capacity to consume. Which means that right now, Southeast Asia would be losing, in a sense, a very important contributor to their growth, a very important contributor to their development. Honestly, when you look at the indicators and that kind of stuff, I think you'll be really looking at how it hurts the overall kind of like revenue streams that Southeast Asia is going to face, the losses they're going to face with Japan's recession. So basically, the idea here is that the partner is not doing well, and because the partner is not doing well, it would hurt your economy to some extent as well. So that's to do with the Japanese recession. Primarily, it hurts the health of Southeast Asian economies because they start to lose investment, they start to have falling national income because of the hurt from this. And also in terms of exports, imports, trade and that kind of stuff, it will decline. It will grow lower as well. Much like what I said about the earlier factors, does this cause the AFC? I don't think so. Not in itself, definitely not. Number one, I feel that it is Japan is an important trading partner. It is an important player in the Southeast Asian region, but I don't think the entire region is dependent upon Japan. So it doesn't have that level of significance. That's number one. Number two, 1991. So that's 6 years away from the crisis. And if it really was that huge of a significant factor, it would have crossed the crisis in the next year, 1992, something like that. But the fact that there's a differential of 6 years suggests that this factor might not be the core reason for why the crisis erupted in 97 itself. So that's Japan. The second country that I want to look at is China. And of course, China, like whatever you think of Japan, China has that 1,000 times potential that Japan has. As at this point in time, that China and India, they are developing economies and they are opening up their economies. So they are in this really opportune stage of their economy, and everyone is quite attracted by the opening up of China and the kind of potential opportunities that they would have over there. This point that I have over here is about the devaluation of the Chinese currency, the Chinese yuan, in 1994. You don't need to know too much about the economics of this, but basically what is happening here is that when the Chinese government decides to devalue their currency, what they are, the goal and the objective over here is to try to make their goods, in a sense, cheaper or more attractive in that economic sense, so that external players will be incentivized to put their investments in China or to buy Chinese products and things like that, because it's going to be relatively cheaper to set up your factories there. It's going to be relatively cheaper to hold Chinese currency. It's going to be relatively cheaper to buy Chinese products, that kind of stuff. The impact factor on Southeast Asia is that this is competition, and it draws a lot of investors away from Southeast Asia and into the Chinese market because they see the Chinese market as more profitable. As Southeast Asia is getting more prosperous and richer and all that, things start to get more expensive in Southeast Asia. So relative to what's happening in China at that point in time, of course, China would be the more attractive option. The devaluation of the Chinese yuan just accelerates that switch of focus, towards China. It makes things even more attractive, that kind of stuff. So governments can do these kind of things to try to attract investors. Again, the impact factor here is on Southeast Asia, and the falling revenue streams that Southeast Asia would have as a result of this, and the falling national income, and all those kind of macroeconomic indicators will start to fall, or will at least be hurt, by this rise of the dragon from the east. So that's about the Chinese point. And then the last point that I have over there is to do with the power in the West, which is the USA. Over here, the point here is about the appreciation of the USD. Now, when a currency appreciates, it means to say that they are, in a sense, they are either artificially or naturally raising the value of the currency. So this can be done by governments, or this can happen naturally, but more or less it's done by governments through their various mechanisms. The impact factor on Southeast Asia here is this. Remember, I told you before that some Southeast Asian countries, their currencies are pegged to the USD. Now, as the USD appreciates, right, as it rises in value, so too have the Southeast Asian currencies that are pegged to them. That means to say that governments who have maintained the peg would have to appreciate their currencies as well. And the problem of Southeast Asia when they appreciate their currency is that it makes things more expensive. It's costlier to hold the currency, or to buy the goods, or to employ manpower, or to set up factory in Southeast Asia, and blah blah blah. Basically, it becomes more expensive to do business in Southeast Asia, and of course, that would lead it to be unattractive lah. That's number one. Number two, I think it to some extent it would drain resources on the part of the governments to try to maintain this peg and to sustain it. So there is some element of governmental drain lah over there. So I think again that hurts the overall health of the economy. Now all these factors over here that I've presented, again it's up to you how significant the level of significance you want to place on them. I've seen very successful essays that run the immediate factors over the structural factors argument. So you can try that out. I'm not saying that this is impossible, but when I look at these factors, I see some problems lah. Number one, the time distance is for some of them is quite large. Number two, in terms of criteria of direct and indirect, a lot of these things I feel are indirect connections to the AFC. Like they may have contributed, but I don't think that they are the most direct cause, or they are the most core reason for the AFC. Of course, that's my own opinion. Feel free to disagree with me. Yeah, and I feel that a lot of these things are the third point. A lot of these things are kind of like ad hoc. It's not a prolonged kind of thing. Like it happens, it hurts the economies, but give it some time and there was, in a sense, like a recovery period of sorts. So in terms of the sustainability of these factors and how heavy their weight is when it comes to contribution to the AFC, I think I would really consider all those things in my relative importance calculations lah, with the structural factors. So that's something for you to think about. And then the other category of immediate causes, I've been through this already also, is looking at the investor speculation itself. Like really what happens in the later half of 1996 leading all the way to July 97 itself. A lot of it has come down to the economic player called the investors and the kind of speculative activity that was going on at that point in time. All these kind of things can be conceptualized into an immediate factor, an immediate player, and things like that. So that's another category of immediate factor, the speculative activity by investors at that point in time. Not just, I just want to emphasize, I skip a few slides first. I just want to emphasize not just in Thailand, but later on towards the rest of Southeast Asia as well. So that degree of speculation, keep in mind that it wouldn't just be confined to a national level, but it would spill over into the entire region as well lah. And in terms of a criteria, like let's say directness, right? Speculative activity really triggers the AFC. So the immediate factors, they have some things going for them, and it's a fair argument to run the immediate factors kind of argument over the structural ones. It's fine. So again, there's no hard and fast rule about which argument you should run. It's really entirely up to you. So actually, I'm done with the podcast and the lecture. And the rest of the time that you have, I want you guys to go into the drive, go into the folder AFC overview, and you can see in this slide here, right, there are two PDF documents at the bottom you see over there. So the first one that I want you to take a look at is the one titled Causes Supplement AFC External Actors. So kind of like some of the things that I talked about today. In that document, I show you how to conceptualize it in a essay form. So it's in a paragraph form. So you can see how that point works out in your actual arguments in a paragraph and essay form. So that's number one. The second document that you see over there is a full essay on the AFC causes. This one is something that I wrote. It is very long. It's about 7 pages. Definitely, it is not achievable within exam conditions. But I just want you to see in full, see how the argument works, borrow the language, borrow the points, borrow the case studies, borrow the evidence if you need. So that can serve as a reference essay for you as to how AFC causes essays work. So in the whatever remaining time you have, I think these are the two priority. The box at the top over there is the main set of notes itself. So of course, whatever that I'm talking to you today, a lot of it is points. When you need the evidence and the substantiation, or if you need more ideas or you need more understanding, please go to the main set of notes. And that's that top box that I highlighted over there. So as simple as that, that's for today's podcast. For the remainder of the time, make sure that you read all those documents. And with that, I'm actually done with the causes of the AFC. So yay, good job guys, everyone. Yeah, I hope you managed to read all the things. And of course, anytime that you don't understand anything to do with this, please let me know. Of course, I will try my best to go through some revision with you all and some essay with your for the AFC before the CTs. Yeah, I'll try my best for that. So yeah, thanks guys for today. Short one for today, but I think it is an important one. Use today's immediate factors to pair it up with your structural factors before and make your own arguments for yourself. Okay, cool. DJ Anesh out.